Hi there. Oh, I better take these guys out. I've been listening to some Arabic. Yeah, this morning I want to talk about as we're approaching the end of our 90-day challenge. Okay. So, what I want to do is I want to have a discussion with a tutor where I'm going to show you how I struggle still to speak Arabic and Persian. So, in order to warm up for, oh, geez, I always forget this. Okay. To warm up for this, so I don't do too badly, I've been doing more listening, and I've had more sort of online sessions with tutors to practice speaking. And so then this always raises in my mind the question of, this relationship between output and input in language learning. There's no question in my mind that we learn through input. There's no question in my mind that the emphasis on output at the early stage of learning a language is not necessary and possibly counterproductive. I notice now, for example, that when I speak with my tutors in Arabic and in Persian, I'm able to enjoy the session 1 hour much more because I understand better what the person is saying. I have more words that I can use, many words that I don't have or that I have forgotten and that I struggle to find, and that often my tutor then provides me in my report, and I review them and I forget them again. However, I have this feeling now that I'm in better control in my conversations with my tutor, and it's a wonderful feeling. It's a wonderful feeling. I didn't feel that way when I first started speaking. Now, in order to get to where you can feel comfortable, of course, you have to speak as well. But I only speak once a week. So 1 hour a week is not why I am starting to feel more and more comfortable. It's because of my continuing, listening and reading. And in particular, I decided that towards the end of my 90-day challenge, rather than doing 3 days of Arabic and then 3 days of Persian, I've kind of focused a bit more on Arabic. I'm further along in Arabic, and yet in some ways Arabic is, well, not some ways, it is harder. And so I've kind of been going now almost for a week on Arabic, and I'm going to, in fact, I have a discussion at 11 o'clock with an Arabic tutor, and then I'm going to switch to Persian. And so I might even film on my iPhone myself sort of speaking Arabic, both for my own records, and I might take some of that and post it here. I think it's better, rather than trying to get the Skype recording where you get different sound levels and fuzzy screens and whatever. If I film it on I've got a handy little, tripod here. If I film myself, just my end of it, so you can hear the tutor in the background very lightly, but you can't hear what he or she is saying. And then you'll see me struggling to speak either Arabic or Persian. So that'll be, in a sense, call it my testimonial or my, demonstration of what I have achieved, which I will keep for my own record, because a year from now, I would, look at that, and it'll be an indication of how much I've advanced. Plus, when you watch yourself speak, you pick up a lot of your mistakes. So I'm going to do that. So that, and as I do that, so I notice now that as a result of speaking, and as a result of the cumulative sort of effect of all of the listening and reading, so I notice more and more things. And now that we have this, you can listen to your whole course at LingQ. So I just go to Assimil, which I have uploaded into LingQ, and listen to the audio of the course. And I start at lesson, say, 50. In Assimil, I go up to 76, and then it flips back to 1. 1 maybe not, but by lesson 10, there are always things there that I hadn't yet noticed or hadn't fully realized. So the whole process of learning a language, it's not like, other things where you learn this basic thing. You have to learn to add and subtract before you can learn engineering or something, Whereas with languages, it's not obvious that one tense is more difficult than another, that there are certain things that are basic and then you build on that. The only thing you really have is a sort of frequency, like some very common words are going to appear more and more often. and familiarity. In other words, if the subject is more familiar, you're going to understand a little bit better. But in Arabic, for example, they start with the past tense. That's the first tense that's introduced in just about every book that I've looked at. And yet we tend to assume, say in European languages, that we should begin with the present and then move on to the past tense, that the past tense is more complicated. It's not more complicated. Nothing is more complicated, really. They are all difficult for us to grasp at first. And then through a lot of exposure and then being familiar with these things because we've seen them, then we notice things that we didn't notice in the first pass. When they start an Arabic grammar book and they tell you that there are all these different kinds of verbs, and it's all lost on you. And I should add another thing. So I think familiarity is extremely important. As we develop a strategy of how much input and how much output we want, because obviously the output stimulates the input. So the output makes you aware of things, and then you're a little more attentive when you're listening. So you do need some, but when you introduce the output, like how often you're going to speak to a tutor, how often you're going to speak, this has got to be part of your strategy. And I don't know if there is a sort of a magic formula of how much input and how much output at what stage. Maybe one day they'll come up with that as a guide, but I think the best guide is what you feel like you want to do. So some people are more inclined to want to use a little bit that they have, and other people are more inclined to want, like I am, to build up greater competence in the language, more vocabulary, better ability to understand, so that then we can feel more comfortable when we have these conversations. And I think we get more out of them, because if we have more words and we understand more, then the range of our conversation can be so much broader. We're not simply talking about the weather and where I live. We're talking about a whole variety of things. And I sort of feel a sense of power as I'm struggling, and I think we all do, as I'm struggling to say things, and I find that I am able to say certain things, and certain words come out of nowhere, and other words come out and they're wrong, and then the teacher corrects them. But so that, I prefer to at least have a chance to have a meaningful conversation, so I wait. But other people, maybe they prefer to get started early. I don't think there's an absolute formula there, but we learn from the input of that, I am certain. And something else that I think is very important is, like when I started with Assimil, they have a lot of content that is, folk tales or from Thousand and One Nights, or something that's very much part of Arabic culture. And I think there's a great tendency on the part of people who write textbooks to give you a lot of culture-rich content early. I noticed this with Chinese, or even in Japanese, festivals and all this kind of stuff. And I think that's a very bad strategy, because it's very important to keep things as familiar as possible. That's why I love our mini stories. If you have a familiar background, people going to work, making breakfast, cleaning up their room, these are all situations that are familiar to us. And so therefore, at least the context is familiar. And so then we have an easier time, trying to learn the new words and the new structures of the language. I now find that the lessons in Assimil, which initially I didn't like because they were too exotic, now I find them interesting because I have a better, a higher level in the language, a higher level of comprehension. So I'm not struggling against an unfamiliar language, an unfamiliar context, things that I just totally don't understand. So now I'm enjoying those. So I think in terms of the input as well, people talk a lot about graded readers, and I think it's good to have the material graded to some extent, but it's also important to start from the familiar and then move towards the less familiar as we proceed through this sort of input strategy. And I remain, I will continue. Input, not only is it the most effective way to learn, in my opinion, but it's also the easiest to organize. I have to set up discussions on LingQ or on italki. I have tutors on both now. I have to try to remember where I have already, booked a discussion so that there's no conflict. Italki doesn't have the easiest interface in the world. So it's always a little bit, and we can probably improve our method at LingQ for interacting with tutors. But and you have to pay them. So a couple of hours a week is plenty. Whereas the listening, I just pick it up and I do it wherever I am. And every time I listen and every time I read, the language is becoming more familiar, and I'm noticing more and more things, and it's building up in me a better and better ability to speak. But ultimately, of course, I have to speak. And so nearing the end of my 90-day challenge in Arabic and Persian, I want to, as I promised, that I would, have a little short video of me using these two languages. So I'll put those up either at the end of this week or by next Monday. Next Monday is probably next Monday or Tuesday, the last day of the 90-day challenge. I noticed, by the way, that someone had posted their a video of them speaking Mandarin after a certain period of time. I haven't had a look at it yet, but I will have a look at it. And if any of you want to post examples of the results of your 90-day challenge, ideally do it on the forum. I've often felt that we should have at LingQ in our profile, and maybe it's something we'll eventually get to, sort of a portfolio where we put sort of recordings of ourselves speaking the language at different stages of our learning. And this portfolio is something that we would control. So if we want, we can have them private, or we can have some of them made public so people can see what our level is in the language. In a way, if you can speak for 5 minutes on video, that's the best measure of how good you are in that language. Far better than any TEFL, TESOL, or IELTS, or all these other tests, in my opinion. However, the advantage of TEFL and TESOL is that if you're a Japanese employer who doesn't speak English very well yourself, you're in no position to judge someone's ability in English through a video, and therefore, at least TEFL or not TEFL, but what's that? It's called TOEIC, gives you a so-called objective evaluation, and that's why it's useful. Okay, I will stop there, and I'll see what people have to say. And I may be leaving early today because I have an Arabic tutor at 11, and I want to spend half an hour warming up by doing a lot of listening and reading and going through some of my lessons on LingQ. So let's have a look and see what we got here. All right. So first, blah, blah, blah. How long have you been using LingQ? My German learning consists simply of reading and listening that I put on LingQ right now, kind of passive. I don't know at what rate I'm actually improving. You're improving. Never worry about the rate at which you're improving. It's cumulative and you don't notice it. You'll notice it when you compare yourself to, say, 3 months earlier. How do you get foreign language content onto LingQ, Scott asks. I don't know if this is a general question or it's for a specific participant here, but I find it online and I import it, and I use the import widget or extension. I do it both on my iPad and with the computer. Many YouTube channels have yes. So YouTube channels have subtitles. Those make excellent lessons at LingQ. You can automatically import them by simply clicking on the extension, browser extension. Yeah, Marlon says he puts them private. Yes, you can't share anything that is not free of copyright. I bought an ebook from Amazon in French and they wouldn't sell it to me. I don't know why that would be. I've bought books in many languages. I don't like ebooks because they come along with audio. I don't understand that, Marlon. I look for ebooks for which I can also buy the audiobook. And if anyone is learning Italian, Il Narratore offers audio ebooks, so you can get both. No. The ebooks are good because if you download a dictionary, you can pouch the word and the definition. Okay. Hi, Mr. Steve. Good afternoon. Ni hao. Blah, blah, blah. Hola. You are right. The closed caption doesn't exactly match. Yeah, if the closed captioning doesn't exactly match, it's not so important. You're learning a bunch of words. People get hung up about accuracy. I don't. They're words. You need them anyway. Sir, may you, I see, Scott, if on most official German can provide audio to word subtitles, very precise. Sir, may you repeat it because I have a paper. I don't understand. May you repeat it? I don't understand. I have my video. You can listen to it as many times as you want. I think there are even subtitles. If you want, you can even import it into Link. In a recent session, you said your wife was quite unhelpful, and I'm glad to see someone else have this problem. My partner is Puerto Rican and no help at all. Yes, Aaron. Don't expect, if you have been in the habit of speaking to your wife or partner in whatever language, your language, her language, a third language, and you start studying her or his language, don't expect them to help you. You're not going to break those habits. Okay, what new language you're learning recently? I'm learning Persian and Arabic. When will you consider learning Turkish? I said I would do that starting in the new year. Now, I may even add Turkish and Hebrew because one of our members at Link has provided us with a whole bunch of good content in Hebrew. So we'll see what the new year brings. But when I'm going to have to pause my Arabic and Persian because I'm going to Ukraine and I want to work on improving my Slavic languages, Ukrainian and Russian in this case. And then because I'm going to the Fukuoka Polyglot Conference, I want to just raise the level of my Korean. So I think that'll be my emphasis until October. And then I'm going to get in, I'll probably get back to Arabic and Persian, start in a bit of Turkish, and I might hold off on the Hebrew. Otherwise, I'll just get too confused. What is early stage to try output? Well, I used to wait till I had, 8,000, 10,000 words, but I have found that with the mini stories where there's so much repetition and there's so many very common verbs, I've started earlier, 3,000 words on our link count. So is that A2? I don't know. But even at that, I only speak once a week. In the early stage, input must be acquired alone without any output participation or must be combined. I don't think there's any must here, but I tend to, in the very early stages, no input. No output. I can't output. I can't say anything. I don't understand what the person is saying. So I wait till I have at least 3,000 words on the link count before I engage a tutor. Okay. Do you think field linguists are able to learn a language faster than regular people? I don't know what a field linguist is, but I feel the study of linguistics has very little to do with learning languages and doesn't give you any advantage. Would you like to tell me how to improve my business English exactly? How can I build a sentence and mail conversation? I don't know what mail conversation is, but to improve in your business English, you have to read more business content, business-related content. You have to save words and phrases that you would like to use. And then I would get on with a tutor and start talking about business. You have to start, and I would write about business, because when you're talking, business English typically is either, the spoken form and the written form are going to be very close together. It's not like sitting around and having a coffee or a beer and chatting about all kinds of different things. It's much more structured. And so I would do a lot of reading on business-related subjects. I would even write on business-related subjects, and I would get a tutor with whom I would simply converse about business-related subjects. Okay, Daylan here. Is it possible to reach B1 or 2 in Chinese living in New York if you have friends and an environment that makes you speak it? So I don't know if you're talking about Mandarin. Obviously, if you have an opportunity to speak, that's a positive thing. I learned Mandarin in Hong Kong where no one spoke Mandarin. In Hong Kong, no one spoke Mandarin in 1968, 69. So the bigger issue is how much listening and reading are you going to do, in my opinion. Or you may just pick up, just by being with your friends, you might pick up some, but it won't be that it won't take you to a B2 level. Hello, Steve. Is it true that reading is more important than watching movies? Because I've noticed the more I read, the more my English grammar expands. Yeah, I'm a great fan of reading. I've said this before. Movies are a bit of a distraction. Movies are a reward. It's fun to watch movies, but we learn more from either audiobooks or reading because they're only words. So the brain has to imagine what the meaning of those words is. And that's much more powerful, in my opinion, than watching movies. Moved to Toronto, enrolled in University of Toronto because full of Chinese. It's pretty. Yeah. The University of Toronto is full of Chinese. Yes. Unfortunately, in Canada, there seems to be a policy of bringing in as many foreign students as possible, many of whom are Chinese. And it does detract a bit from, in my opinion, and this might be controversial, from the kind of atmosphere you'd want to have at a Canadian university. The tendency for those people is to stick within their own group and not really become part of the general university community. But if you do too much input, pretty sure you can't achieve B1 in any language within 6 months. No, that's not true, Marlon. I focus on input, and you can judge based on an hour a week over the last 3 months of talking to a tutor. But certainly input for the first 3 months. I mean, my Persian has only been 3 months, and you'll see that I can communicate quite well. Hello, Steve. I'm often in a situation when I watch Russian bloggers, and I understand like 60 to 70%, but I can't really use such construction in speech, even though I know the meaning. How do I overcome it? You just have to speak more often. Continue the input, save words and phrases, and then just speak more often, and you're going to struggle. It's not like an automatic, everything that goes in is going to come out. No, you will always have a much larger passive vocabulary than active vocabulary, because the native speaker has far more words than you do. But you just have to continue. You just have to continue, and slowly you'll get better. Would you recommend learning the Chinese characters? Yes, I recommend learning the Chinese characters. It's kind of a door to the Chinese world. If you can read, you can learn so much faster. You can learn more words. You can acquire more vocabulary. It's a lot of work to learn the characters, and it's something you have to get at and do every day. Is it possible to achieve C2 with 90% input and 10% output? No. This combination of input and output, the further along you are in the language, the more you have to output. Because while C2, I guess you theoretically could be C2 just passively in terms of listening comprehension and reading. And if you are, you're going to speak well. But as I progress, as I reach a sort of a B1, B2, I feel a greater and greater need to speak. And to really get to that next level, you have to speak a lot, like hours at a time. So an evening with native speakers or things of that nature. You just have to put yourself into a situation where you are forced to use the language more. Mimicking and reading out loud. Does mimicking and reading out loud help with output? Yeah, I mean, it depends what you like doing and what you're able to do. I have never found that I can read out loud for any long period of time. I can't, there is this sort of shadowing technique. I just found that I can't continue doing it, but many people like doing it. Certainly keeping a small journal is another very good thing to do. But again, it depends if you are able to continue doing it. It does take a certain amount of difficulty. How are some people able to speak 10 to 15 languages fluently? More or less, in my opinion, following the same strategy that I use. Anyone can do that if they devote enough time to it. Do you think a person who learns a second language will necessarily want to learn others? No, I don't think so. I think probably most people who learn a second language stop there. But I think it's possible for people to learn many languages. My nephew is 7 years old. We live in Brazil. We only speak Portuguese. How to teach English for him? He has to go to English school about 1 year, but his improvement is very slow. Yeah, I mean, you can't force 7-year-olds. We tried with our kids. We tried to get them to speak, French, whatever. They resisted. But if he's in a class, I would leave it. Like, he has to do whatever the class teacher asks him to do. My grandchildren went to French immersion. They just do whatever they're asked to do. But I think pressure from relatives is probably not a good thing. Let him, he's in that environment, he'll acquire something in the language, and at some point, if he's motivated, then he will probably progress very quickly. Yeah, I mean, writing every day is certainly a good thing to do. I think writing is different from speaking, so ultimately, you would have to start practicing your speaking. This is an answer to Eric Roberts. Until what degree of mastery can input take you? Input, again, it's not either or, it's just how much of one and how much of the other. And I think like a lot of input can take you straight to B1. And then I think you want to start speaking. What is comprehensible input? You can click on each word for its definition. So if we agree grammar should be secondary to the exposure process, this continues somewhere else. Comprehensible input is input, but the quick answer without seeing the second part of this question, comprehensible input is input that you have a chance of understanding at least half of. So if it's totally incomprehensible, unfamiliar, it's too tough. If you can understand half of it and then you go and click on words and see more of it and you listen and you still don't understand, but at least you're working towards something that is that's achievable so that you have a chance of achieving 70% comprehension. So that to me is comprehensible input. It can't be 100% comprehensible, otherwise you're not learning anything. It's got to be less than fully comprehensible. Is it 70%, 80%? If you're using a system like LingQ, it can be 50, 60%. If you're reading out of a book, you want 90, 95%. If you're listening and you can get back to a text like at LingQ, then 70% is fine. If you're listening, and you don't have any way of getting out of text, you probably want a higher level of comprehension. Should I start learning a new language only after I achieve B2 in a previous one? No, although that's probably ideal. It depends on what you feel like, what your needs are. I don't think there's any hard and fast rule. Learning Swedish is no different than learning any other language. Lots of listening and reading. You'll get more and more familiar with the pronunciation, with the words, and you'll just be surprised how the language grows on you. So language learning is a sort of a fuzzy activity. It's not learning the basics and building blocks. It's exposing yourself. The brain is better at sort of forming rules out of the chaos of the language as opposed to understanding theoretical explanations of the language. So don't rely on theoretical explanations of the grammar. Rely on exposing yourself to a lot of the language. That's too meowstic. After reading and listening, what is most important, writing or speaking? Well, it depends what you want to do, but I tend to do more speaking because it's easier. I'm newish to LingQ, but I noticed that when using a phone, a word at an end of a page which extends to the following page is not clickable. Are you familiar with this? Cheers, Kieran. I'm not familiar with this. I don't know whether it's an Android or an iOS phone. Maybe Eric can follow up, Eric of LingQ. Maybe you can post about this on the forum. But I will, if I remember, I will look into it. But I'm not aware of this as an issue. It isn't an issue for me on iOS. So, but that's not to say, I understand it, it's an issue for you. You could also send a message to support@LingQ, email, and see what they have to say. Why did you decide to move to Vancouver? I live in Vancouver. My wife doesn't like it when it rains here in the winter, so we go down to Palm Springs for 4 months in the winter. Have you been reading the Ukrainian news? It would be interesting to know what Ukrainians think about the recent election results, Ian says. Well, I'm going to Ukraine in the second half of May, and it's going to be very, very interesting. An amazing result, really, to have the incumbent so thoroughly trounced by an absolute newcomer. I found apps like Hello Talk to be amazing, but the conversation is slow because I know so little. How many words do you recommend learning before exposing yourself? Well, as I said, I used to think 8,000 to 10,000 words, known words at LingQ. I now start a little earlier because I have been using the mini stories, which I think prepare me for speaking. Jack here says, thanks to your advice, I've hugely improved my Spanish level at LingQ, and now I have a solid comprehension level. My question is, do you recommend on separating listening and reading? I find I do both, listening and reading at the same time, especially at the early stages when it's difficult. But then gradually, I find that as I advance, certainly most of my listening is done while not reading because I'm in the car or I'm doing other activities. But as I get at sort of a B2 level, I just do plain listening because I don't need to necessarily to read it all. There's not that many words that I don't know. It's not necessarily worth it. One of the things I am going to do now with my Ukrainian, where there may be more words, is I can throw the podcast from Hromadske Radio or whatever. I can throw it onto one of the automatic transcription services and get a transcript. So I could then, after listening to it, if I'm curious about some parts that I missed, bring it in, have it transcribed and bring it into LingQ. But yeah, increasingly we separate. I find I separate the listening and reading. Who is your favorite polyglot? Don't have a favorite polyglot. I am impressed with people who speak 2 languages, 3 languages, 5 languages, 10 languages. It's all, I always marvel at people who speak another language well. And there's lots of them. I have a hard time expressing myself about complicated topics, even though I can understand most of what people say when I talk. So should I focus more on speaking at this point? This is English. Yeah. I mean, yeah, you have to, speaking is a different skill. You have to be able to recall your vocabulary. You have to put the words together in a, in an elegant way. And so you do have to end up speaking more. Henry no longer works at LingQ. Do you think you can forget output in language when you only do input for several times? You get rusty. I don't think you forget, but you get rusty. And depending on the language, it takes me longer and longer to warm up. So the languages that I speak the best, like French and Japanese and so forth, not a problem. Russian, a little more difficult. Czech, Romanian is going to be quite difficult. And I'm aware of the fact that once I leave my Persian and Arabic here, when I go back to them, they're going to be rusty. But I have always found that when I go back to outputting in those languages, that I end up being better than I ever was. So I'm not worried about leaving them. But yeah, sometimes it takes a bit of refreshing, of listening and eventually reading. I don't understand. I need to talk about flap, how to pronounce fast D. I don't understand that. Do you sometimes surprise yourself with retrieving a word during a conversation after struggling for a while? Khalifa, Al-Khalifa. I'm always surprised when I'm both frustrated at what I am unable to remember or to recall when I know I have that word, and also surprised at words that come out that I think are quite difficult and low frequency. It's all quite random. Have you ever tried to learn an endangered language to help it revival? No, and I don't think I would do that. That's not in my strategy of language learning. Do you use mnemonic techniques to remember those few thousand common words? No, I have never found that to be worth the effort. Scott says, tell us about Ukraine when you get back. We'll do so. James Cook, Steve, people who study English in Mexico only motivated by the prospect of promotion at work, not by the language and culture. Yeah, I mean, that's necessarily the case with English, because English is sort of a utilitarian language. Now, there are people who like English because they like, American soap operas or, English music or something. But English would be a language which people learn for reasons of work, and that's fine. But those same people would learn it better if they could find something to enjoy in the language. I mean, I've heard it's hard for Brazilian people to reach a level of Spanish where their brain don't confuse both languages. I think that it's a mindset thing. I think if Brazilians really committed to be speaking Spanish, they have such a big advantage over Portuguese speakers. If they go for it, they can quickly become very fluent. And initially they might confuse, or they might continue to confuse the odd word. It doesn't really matter. They can become quite fluent quite quickly. Okay, Lion says, when I listen to podcasts on my playlist using my phone, it tends to triple or quadruple the time I actually listen. All right, again, I don't know anything about these technical issues. I will ask, again, if you could comment on our forum to see if other people are experiencing the same. That would be helpful. I'm a Portuguese native speaker and I can't bear Spanish. Too ugly to my ears. Well, you see, if that's the attitude, then the person won't learn the language. So that's why I say it's largely an attitude issue. It's a bit like Mandarin speakers not claiming they can't learn Cantonese. It's just an attitude thing. If they wanted to learn Cantonese, they could learn it very quickly. Muchas gracias, no consigo espero tenerlo. Seguir viendo tus videos. Thank you, Manuel. Здравствуйте. Good. и gracias. Вы можете поддерживать хорошую беседу на русском? Yeah, более-менее. Can I maintain a good conversation in Russian? I think so, and I'll find out because I'll be in Ukraine, and I'll be in Eastern Ukraine, and there most people speak Russian. Do you like Quebec or French accent better? I find that they both have their charm, and even within Quebec or within France, there are different accents. And I try not to be judgmental about accents. I think they're all unique, and Scottish, Australian, Southern France, Brazilian, Portuguese. That's just part of enjoying the language. How far do you think I can get in French in 2-3 months if I'm A1 at the moment? In 2-3 months, you can reach B1. Do you think culture affects language and vice versa? Does learning a new language change your culture and way of thinking? Well, the more things you know, the more things you're exposed to, the broader your perspective on things, it does impact your way of thinking. If you know nothing, then you know that you're going to have a very limited perspective on things. So, but you can even reading is going to change your perspective on things, reading in your own language. So, but I find that learning languages just makes me more familiar with other cultures, makes me in a way more sympathetic to other cultures. So to that extent, it does affect my world view. You might want to look at Caption's research if you're a bit nerdy. There's a lot of research on them teaching and helping children. Good, Ian. Is there any way to reach B2 in Mandarin if you put everything in that language? Well, yeah, you can reach B2 in Mandarin. I mean, I think I'm B2 in Mandarin. Any language can be learned. I know lots of foreigners who, like non-Chinese speakers who didn't necessarily grow up in a multilingual environment, who have achieved very high levels in Mandarin. Why do people assume adults learn language by a different process than children when it's very rare for people to assume adults learn other things by a different process? Well, that's a good question. I mean, adults have there are advantages and disadvantages. Like the child's brain is more flexible. The child is less inhibited. The adult has a broader life experience. The adult has a broader vocabulary in his or her own language. Adult can read, can access a wider variety of subjects. So to that extent, the learning experience is different. But I think the process by which the brain acquires the language, in other words, it creates rules to govern all this input that it's getting, is essentially the same. O que você acha do inglês dos brasileiros? How can you ask a question like that? What do I think of the English spoken by Brazilians? It varies all over the place. I know a Brazilian here, Gabrielle, whose English is like a native Canadian. So it depends on the individual. You can't generalize. Okay, how do you study relating? Do you just read or do you take notes? I don't take any notes. I listen. I don't understand things. I go in there. I go through the lesson. As I turn the page, I will often review the words and phrases that were on that page. I sometimes will review the words and phrases that were in the lesson using our 5 activities. And then I go away and listen and listen and listen. And then there's still things that I don't understand. I go back and I read it. And I will often go back and go back and go back to the same lesson. Maybe I did, a lesson that I did 2 months ago. I've got so many lessons on the go at so many different levels. And it's just simply exposing myself to the language, audio, reading, reviewing, listening, different levels. And slowly things start to accumulate. I'm a native Spanish speaker and I have C1 English. If I study French for about 1.5 hours a day, how long would it take to reach B2 from Puerto Rico? If you really go at it and if you have a good attitude, like attitude is so important. Like, okay, the Brazilian who hates Spanish, he's not going to learn Spanish. If you say, I can visualize myself as a French speaker. I want to be a French speaker. If you've got that kind of an attitude, then I think you can reach B2 in 3 months. I think you can reach B2 certainly in comprehension because you'll have all the words. You'll struggle to speak, and then you just got to speak more and more. But you've got that tremendous advantage that you'll have all the words in 3 months, and then you just got to start speaking, and you'll have difficulty, but eventually you'll get better. You won't get worse. Okay, what do we got here? Can I learn 2 languages at the same time if at least B1 of the first language? I need to maintain 1 more. Yeah, I'm struggling right now with Persian and Arabic. I think I would rather be able to focus on 1, but it's certainly possible to do 2. Will hang out with other polyglots make you work harder to learn more language? That's possible. I don't know. As a teenager, am I as good as a child with learning languages, or is my learning style more closer to an adult's? Yeah, a teenager is closer to the adults. You have your brain is no longer as flexible. They talk about the age of 7 or whatever, where any language can very quickly, you know, be assimilated. You have a broader vocabulary. You have quite a, you know, a broader sort of life experience. So you are more similar to an adult, in my opinion. Okay, Bielka Mua, do you use Audible to practice? I have. Sometimes if I'm looking for an audio book, I'll find it on Audible. As to which book I can recommend, it depends on what language you're learning. Like, I don't go to Audible necessarily, but it just seems if I'm looking for an audiobook in, if I'm looking for an audiobook in Polish or Czech, Audioteka seems to pop up. I'll go to wherever the source is, and typically I'm looking for audiobooks for which I can also find an ebook. Do you try to practice with people on internet like Moses, because he says that you should keep practicing until the moon starts to show? No, I have great respect for Moses. I think it's amazing the number of languages that he explores and is able to speak in quite well, actually. But we all have our preferences, and I don't like going out and just springing, with a little camera and sort of talking to people. If I happen to come across, let's say, if I go into a store here in Vancouver and the salesperson is obviously a Farsi speaker, I'll try and speak to them in Farsi, but I don't make a special effort at it. Hangong iso ilbonin pogo iso. Okay. Steve, I'm living in Japan, and I find that most Japanese people don't want to correct me, so I wonder if I'm making the same mistake over and over again without knowing it. What can I do? Don't expect people that you're speaking with to correct you. That is a completely unrealistic expectation. First of all, I believe that if I'm speaking to someone in English and they make mistakes, it's not my role to correct them. They may not want me to correct them. That person is trying to communicate with me. If I start correcting them, it's as if our communication is not important. You will correct most of your mistakes yourself. Enjoy your communication with native speakers for that opportunity to communicate with them, and don't expect them to correct you. Do you know why Gabriel stopped making YouTube videos? No, and in fact, he sent me an email. I'm going to meet with him shortly and do a video with him. Yeah, I mean, James says that people, not everyone is going to be motivated, passionately to learn English. However, if I were a teacher, I've got to try to find something that might elicit a spark of interest, because the more emotionally connected they are to the language, the better they're going to learn. Okay, so Matthias, again, this whole question of why we have trouble speaking, you're going to have trouble speaking. And the only way to get better at it is to speak more, and also to continue with your input activities. Russian language, I found the Russian language difficult to learn because of the complex nature of all Slavic languages, the grammar. But it's a lovely language and a very interesting one. Can you become fluent in any language in a year with hard work? Depends on your definition of fluent. It depends on the language, writing system, how similar it is to yours, but it's a good goal to have. I don't have a favorite language. As a native language English living in Poland and attending a Polish school, do you think the teaching style in Poland is harmful that you cannot pronounce English? He speaks it. Yeah, I mean, the majority of language teachers are not native speakers. The majority of speakers of English are not native speakers. There is such an abundance of native English content available on the internet. The teacher should be directing the students to listen to this content. I don't think listening to people with a bad accent is harmful, as long as we're getting enough exposure to, authentic, native pronunciation. I spend most of my time in English. Can you learn a language with just watching movies? No, I have not found that to be the case. How many words do I need in order to start talking? Again, this question has come up before, but I think with German, if you're 3,000 to 5,000 words, go through our mini stories. That's going to give you a lot of the familiar vocabulary, verbs, and stuff that you need. Okay. The Arabic podcasts that I find are on Al Jazeera and France 24. I found them on, what do you call it there? iTunes. Levantine Arabic, you'd have to Google. There is some Levantine Arabic in our library at LingQ. How is your relation with Mr. Aguelles? I've never met him. Do you think knowing many languages gives you a huge advantage in the job market? Not necessarily. It depends what job you're looking for. Okay, with that, I'm going to leave because I want to spend a little bit of time warming up for my Arabic lesson, which starts in 15 minutes. Thank you, everyone, and we'll see you on Friday. Bye for now.